Welcome back to the Boys in the Booth podcast, episode 214. Cody Abrams and Melbourne as our division previews continue ahead of the start of the 24-25 NHL season. And now we're moving on to the second division in the Western Conference, the Central. Let's get right into it, boys. Case, we'll go to you first with your pick for first place in the Central.
Yeah, I think there is a bit of a toss-up at the top of this division, but kind of no surprise coming from me as I am a bit of a sleeper Dallas Stars fan. I have them number one. I think that they're one of the top teams in the entire league and maybe the best built team in the entire league. That could be debated for sure, but I can't find one hole in this team's lineup. Deep stacked forward core. D have all the elements you need from puck moving to skating ability to size. One of the best goalies in the league, a decent backup, top five special teams in both power play and penalty kill. They kind of just have it all. And all while their best players are young and only getting better every single year. Now they might miss a guy like Joe Pavelski, but they have the next Joe Pavelski and Stankoven right away. And like another great addition to this team to kind of fill that role of Joe Pavelski is the AHL MVP and leading scorer, the 22-year-old Maverick Bourque. How do they keep finding these guys and how do they just keep getting better? It's such a great system they have going in Dallas.
Great system. They've clearly drafted well over the past, however many years. It was the 2018 draft that completely turned this team around. We've talked about that a bunch of times, being able to get Heiskanen, Robertson, and Ottinger all in the same draft and turning your team around completely. So through the draft, they're incredible. And that's why they keep getting guys like Bourque, like Stankoven, like Wyatt Johnston, who come into the lineup and just produce right away. Another guy who's going to do that is Thomas Harley. He had a great season last year, and they're looking for him to build on it this year with a bit of an elevated role, I think. Because, you look at their back end, and it's not as... I don't want to say it's not as strong as it used to be, but it's not as proven, I think, as it used to be. They lost guys like Tanev, Hakanpää, Ryan Suter, and they added guys like Dumba and Lyubushkin. At this point, Dumba and Lyubushkin, I think, are both 4 or 5 guys, on a good contending team. So maybe they want to add at the deadline to the back end, but that's what contending teams have to do in the salary cap era. So I'm not worried about their back end. Plus, like I mentioned with Harley, if he can have another season where he puts up 50 plus points in an elevated role, I think that would be great for him and the team. And I think it's realistic too. So I agree with you, Case. I love how this team is built. Their top 9 is incredible. Their back end isn't as scary as it used to be, just for the fact that it's a bit less proven, but it's still pretty good. And then, of course, you've got Otter between the pipes. So I agree at number 1. That's where I had them too. So I think it's a good pick.
Yeah, one of the best rebuild on the flies that we've seen ever. I think in the NHL, in the salary cap era, really. Jim Nill and the rest of the staff have done an incredible job and turning over this team. And I'll give you another name, boys, another young player who is going to play some games for this team. I think you talk about the back end. And I agree. I think it is a little bit weaker, although Dumba and Lyubushkin are still some serviceable players. But Leon Bichsel, this kid looks like an absolute giant. And I was watching a little bit of the Minnesota-Dallas preseason game before I hopped on here with you guys. And Stankoven scored a beautiful goal. I think he's going to have a huge year. Bourque, as you mentioned, will be getting in there, but Bichsel looks like an absolute monster back there. So there's another guy to add to the list of the Stars, how they just continue, like we saw with the Tampa Bay Lightning for so many years, being able to just bring in guys constantly to fill roles when other guys exit the team. So, Dallas, no brainer, number 1 in this division. I agree.
And you have to remember last year that Jason Robertson kind of took a little bit of a step back and then found himself later on in the season. So if he can be the Jason Robertson we expect, and then you have the resurgence of Duchesne, Sagan, and Ben continue on from what we saw last year, this team could be a President's Trophy winning team if, all of that comes together. So
Yep.
definitely a team to watch out for.
Yeah, President's Trophy is not crazy to say at all. They had 113 points last season, and I could see them doing it again, and that could be good enough to win the President's Trophy for best team in the league. So could definitely see that. Going to number 2 now in this division. Last season, it was the Winnipeg Jets. Sorry, Jets fans, I'm not picking them to finish second this year in this division. I think they've just lost too much. And I think, frankly, there's just a better team ahead of them, maybe even a couple. And so at number 2, I'm going to go with the Colorado Avalanche. I think, they're still a really good team. Their forward group is pretty much the exact same. And this was the team who scored the most goals in the league last year. So offensively, they're going to be fine, especially if they eventually get Landeskog back. We don't know if that's going to happen, but it's at least a possibility this year that they get their captain back, who's missed the last 2 full seasons with injury. And then also Valerie Nichushkin and Arturi Lehkonen will not start the season with the team for different reasons. But both of them should be back this season at some point, and that will help this team score goals. So yes, they got a bit thinner on the back end by losing Sean Walker, who they acquired at the deadline. But when you look at the back end, they kind of kept the same formidable top 4 group, and then they just added to the bottom pair, and they added a bunch of guys who can be serviceable on the bottom pair, and it's just going to come down to who is playing better at a given moment. So I still like the way this team is constructed. Their goaltending, it's a sneaky good tandem with Georgiev and Annunen. So yeah, I think second in the division is the perfect spot for the Avalanche, even with the fact that they're missing a few of their key guys to start the year.
Yeah, second is where I have them too. This is the team that I said was a toss-up between them and Dallas, but I just see them as a bit more top-heavy than Dallas. And I mean, that being said, the top 6 and top 4 of this team and the star power are enough to make this team elite. So the one place that I tried to poke a hole was in net, actually. I think Georgiev, he had a lot of wins last year, but the statistics didn't show that he was great. So you never know how goaltending is going to work out. That was one question. And then you touched on it quickly, is that this team is kind of like Vegas now, where you can't mention them without talking about injuries. So the goaltending, as well as the injuries to the middle 6 and I'll call it variability of Nichushkin. It's just, I have that as just enough for them to fall out of the top spot.
Yeah, and I hear what you're saying too about Dallas and their depth, especially up front. Like, looking at the Dallas lineup, is there a better top 9 in the NHL? Like, they are so deep, and I know they don't have, the star power of a McKinnon or a McDavid or a Matthews or whatever, but their top 9 is just so deep. So that was a reason I put Dallas over Colorado as well. But yeah.
Yeah, clean sweep here, boys. Colorado and number 2 for me as well. They definitely are a bit of a wild card coming into this season with the uncertainty around Landeskog and Nichushkin. But I think that they'll be able to weather the storm. This is still a very good team with the likes of McKinnon, Rantanen, Makar, Casey Middlestad, and the list goes on. So I think there's a lot there. They play a really fast game, and they're very talented. And like I mentioned, Lian Bichsel as another up and coming young player for the Dallas Stars. I'll mention another one for the Colorado Avalanche, and that's Callum Ritchie. I've heard a lot of buzz about this kid being a very talented prospect. And so maybe he's a guy who is able to crack this roster and play some games and maybe be sort of a stopgap until, you get the likes of Landeskog and Nichushkin back. But they've got some options there. Like, it's going to create some really good opportunities for whether it's a Kovalenko or a Jonathan Drouin, for example, who had a really nice bounce back year last year. I think there's enough there top to bottom for Colorado to be a very good team to weather the storm early on. And I've got them at number 2 as well.
Callum Ritchie went one pick before Easton Cowan in the 2023 entry draft.
There you go. And again, we're starting to see very early on how deep that draft is looking. Already with all the talent. So
yeah, deep. And I'm looking at it now. I still think it's funny that David Edstrom, who went 32nd, has been traded twice before playing a game. So
yeah, good point. Yeah, absolutely. All right, moving on to number 3, boys. I have the Nashville Predators in the 3rd spot. They had just an unbelievable offseason, but by all accounts, maybe the best offseason in terms of getting better. You add some star power in Steven Stamkos and Jonathan Marchessault up front. Yes, they are getting older, but these are two guys who can score, and they've had a ton of success, winning Stanley Cups, and Marchessault, the Conn Smythe Trophy winner a couple of years ago. So those are two huge additions. You had Brady Shea on the back end. He was so good in Carolina. And you lose Askarov, but they did add, Scott Wedgwood to be the backup to UC Saros, who they were able to extend long term, which is great. So Nashville clearly wanting to be a contender. And of course, we saw them make it to the Stanley Cup Finals in 2017. And Barry Trotz is looking to get them back there. I think he's done a great job. They had 99 points last season. I think they played pretty well against Vancouver in the first round, but ultimately lost. And really no surprise there, but I think they gave the Canucks all that they could handle. But Nashville is certainly a better team. I think they should be considered a contender, and I've got them at number 3 in this division.
Yeah, I agree. I didn't want to put them at number 3, but ultimately I did. I just looked at this offseason, and it's nice that they were able to bring in the big fish while addressing the direct needs that they had in their top 6, as well as on the back end. Their first power play unit is going to be ridiculous. At the moment, the way they've been lining up is Forsberg, O'Reilly, Marchessault, Stamkos, and Josi. And, Stamkos and Marchessault are power play weapons. And you add them into a already decent 3-man system there. I think that's going to be disgusting. I love the decor. Some high skill guys, and then 2 bowling balls in Shen and the league leader in hits last year, Jeremy Lauzon. Very strong in net. We are, huge UC Saros podcast, and the depth of this team is maybe the spot where I can see a bit of concern. But if that's your biggest issue, then I think you're laughing.
Totally. Huge UC Saros fans, but also, Case, huge Scott Wedgwood fans. I know he's only going to play like 15 games this year, but the guy's been solid for the last 3 to 4 years. He's been a really good backup and has won a ton of games, and has really kind of carved out a name for himself over the last few years after being kind of a bit of a journeyman around the league. So good for Wedgwood earning another deal, and he'll be an important part of this team that is likely bound for the playoffs. And if they are bound for the playoffs, finishing 3rd in the Central, Case, then they're the last team in this division, according to you, that is going to the playoffs, because you've got 5 from the Pacific and 3 from the Central, and we'll get into that next. But before we do that, I just want to say I agree. I also didn't want to put Nashville in the 3 spot just because everyone is hyping up their offseason and has been since July 1st, because they signed 3 big fish. They bolstered their team at every position, and I just wanted to find some sort of hole with this team. But then you look at their record last year, like Harp mentioned, they had 99 points. They're adding to that group the 3 big names that you guys have already mentioned, Stammer, Marchessault, and Shea on the back end. So they're not going to get worse, but I just wanted to poke holes in the team and really couldn't. I think their defense is, not great, but like you said, Case, they've kind of just got guys who play the roles that you need in the top 4. They've got a nice mix of shutdown guys and puck movers, so maybe it just works, and they're built in a way that allows a good coaching staff to get the most out of this team, sort of like what happened last year. And if that's the case, and that's kind of what I'm leaning into, that's why I'm going with Nashville at number 3. But I'm like you, Case. I didn't want to put them in the 3 spot. I just couldn't find a way not to.
Yeah, it doesn't feel right. I feel like something's got to give, and maybe they have some bad voodoo coming their way for all the hype. But I don't know. We'll see how that turns out. So I'll jump into number 4 here.
Yep.
The team that I have, as I mentioned, because of the Pacific guys, just missing the playoffs is the Winnipeg Jets. I have them at number 4. It feels like rinse and repeat with this Jets team again. Mostly the same guys that leave me saying the same thing, where I don't love the decor, but the guys up front are responsible enough, playing in their own end, that it is going to make up for it. And if that fails, they have Hellebuck stealing games for them in net. They need to get the most out of their core guys, their core group of forwards that they have. And if one of those guys or two of those guys take a month, a week, a day off, this team falls off pretty quick. And that's why I have them just missing the playoffs at number 4.
I'm in agreement, Case. I also have them in the 4 spot. One more thing I wanted to add on Nashville, by the way, who we picked to finish number 3. They have 3 first rounders in 2025. So if they're in a good spot come trade deadline, look for them to flip at least one of those and
100%.
add to their squad.
Yeah.
So 3 first rounders is crazy for a team who had nearly 100 points last year. But yeah, talking about Winnipeg, I also have them in the 4 spot. I'm with you, Case. Like, they have the same sort of core, but now they've started to lose around the periphery of that core. Like, they lost Monahan, they lost Toffoli, they lost Brendan Dillon, they lost Nate Schmidt, and Larry Bourgeois. Like, they lost all of those guys this year. And even though Hellebuck is a Vezina caliber goalie year in, year out, I just don't know if they have enough to support him and replicate the year that they had last year, where, like I previously mentioned, they finished second in the division and had 110 points. I don't know if it's crazy for us to say that they're going to miss the playoffs, because that would mean they probably have to get about 15 to 18 fewer points in the standings, which is a big swing year over year, especially when a lot of the same group remains intact. But I think I'm with you. Like, it just seems like, you know, other teams are getting better around them in both divisions in the West, and Winnipeg is kind of just staying the same. So 4 spot seems like a good spot for them. I think what they're going to be relying on and hoping is that guys like Cole Perfetti and maybe even Brad Lambert kind of step up this year and provide some extra scoring for this team.
Yeah, definitely. I think Winnipeg is a team that, while it was great to see them have so much success last season, I think they overachieved in a lot of ways. Absolutely. And this team completely fell apart in the first round against Colorado. Like, they just got absolutely shelled. And, you know, while they got bested by a better hockey team, they kind of beat themselves. All their system and structure and everything that they had in place, that just completely went out the door. And Scott Arniel takes over as the head coach of this team. He's been on the bench as an assistant. That can be a really hard transition too, from assistant to head coach of a team. So curious to see how that kind of works. I know that he did step in and was the head coach for a period of time when Rick Bowness had to leave for family matters, but that can be a hard thing. You know, I'll give you an example. We saw that with when Todd Reardon took over in Washington, and the team just did not respond well at all, and they were coming off a Stanley Cup win. So that can be a really hard thing to do as well. But yeah, to me, Winnipeg is just one of those teams that's just kind of in the middle. And so, yeah, I also have them at number 4 in this division.
It's a hard transition to go from assistant coach to head coach, because, you know, and I've heard people say this, you're used to being the good guy, you know, the guy that can relate to the players more so. And then all of a sudden, when you're the head coach, you have to put your foot down and kind of play a different role. So I see how that transition could be tough. That being said, I'm in agreement with Casey. You mentioned it off the top. Like, it's going to come down to the players, and especially the core players who have been here. They're going to need to get the best out of those guys if they're going to compete. Because, if guys like Scheifele and Ehlers and Connor just aren't good, then neither is this team. And by the way, did you see the preseason game the other night when Hellebuck let in 8 goals against, I want to say it was Minnesota? I think it was like an 8-5 game. You guys see that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the comments on the posts were so good. Every comment was like, someone tell Hellebuck it's not the playoffs.
Yep.
Because his preseason and playoffs, for whatever reason, he gets shelled. But then in the regular season, he's a Vezina guy year over year. So who knows? We interrupt this podcast to tell you about one of our favorite partners, Sign Up Expert. If you're a sports bettor, whether brand new, casual, or hardcore, listen very carefully because this ad is for you. Guys, line shopping for the best odds matters, and that's why any profitable sports bettor needs to be using multiple sports books to maximize their profits. Thankfully, there's never been a better time to get signed up, and we're here to connect you with the best promotions industry-wide. When you use our link at signupexpert.com/boysinthebooth, you can get access to all the top sportsbooks in your region, along with a review of each platform and its unique benefits. Most importantly, all of these sportsbooks have valuable sign-up offers for new users, and when you register through our link, you will automatically receive the top offer at each one, allowing you to start line shopping right away with an enhanced bankroll. Guys, it's simple. When you use multiple sportsbooks, you ensure that you can always access the best available odds, which is key to successful and profitable sports betting. So if you want to take advantage of these incredible benefits and support our brand at the same time, please consider signing up for your next sportsbook through the link in the description down below, signupexpert.com/boysinthebooth. If you're planning on signing up for a new sportsbook anyways, you might as well use the link and support the boys. So one more time, that's signupexpert.com/boysinthebooth. This podcast is also sponsored by the absolute best ticket app out there, SeatGeek. SeatGeek takes the confusion out of buying tickets, making it quick and easy to get the best deals on tickets to your favorite sporting events. SeatGeek does this awesome thing where they score each ticket out of 10 based on its value, so you know if you're getting a good or a bad deal. If the tickets are green, for example, you better act quick and secure those things because that's a good deal, but if the tickets are red, maybe wait a bit before pulling the trigger and monitor the price in the app. SeatGeek just makes it way too easy. Anyway, here's the best part though. SeatGeek has completely hooked us up. Boys in the Booth listeners get $20 off their first purchase on SeatGeek with the promo code Boys in the Booth in all caps. So click the link in the description down below to download the app, and remember to get your discounted tickets using the code Boys in the Booth in all caps. Get great seats for a fraction of the cost with SeatGeek.
Exactly. All right, number 5, Chad.
Number 5, this is, I think, where it gets a little dicey. There are a few teams here that I think could compete for this spot. But if the standings go the way that we think they're going to go, this team isn't going to make the playoffs anyway, though it would be fun if they did. I've got Utah in the 5 spot. The Utah Hockey Club, I think they're going to get a nice bump after the move to Utah with some new fans, a new building. They're actually going to be playing in front of more than 4,000 fans every night, which is going to be nice for that team. They're going to feel like they're in the NHL. It's another year older for some of their young stars like Cooley and Gunther. And, they also added to the back end. They added guys like Sergachev, who I think is a huge addition. I know Moser is a good defenseman, but Sergachev just comes with, well, frankly, 2 Stanley Cup rings and the pedigree of being the guy who was riding shotgun to Victor Hedman for both of those victories. So he's going to bring some much needed experience and championship pedigree to this team, which I think can't be overstated. And, I like their goaltending tandem. Ingram was good last year, and they've got Vejmelka backing him up, who can steal games if he's playing a bottom 5 team in the league. So, or a top 5 team. Actually, I got that mixed up. Every time Vejmelka plays a top 5 team, he steals the game. But yeah, so honestly, I like the pieces that they have, and I think they're going to be better than people expect simply for the fact that their young players are getting a year older, and they're going to get a nice little mood bump from playing in an NHL arena.
Yeah, it's nice to not being absolutely dumping on this team for once. It is great. I was excited to talk about them for that exact reason. I was anticipating being nice and talking about them in the 6th spot, but I can see the argument for 5. A top 9 is formed in Utah. They are going to get that bump from the new team. I like the goaltending, but I prefer if you had a real number 1 starter for sure.
Yeah.
That's something that they're missing, and they could use some TLC on the back end. I think it's nice to have a bona fide superstar on the back end in Sergachev. I feel like we haven't seen that in Arizona or Phoenix since, OEL was that guy for a while, but other than that, not much there. So it's nice to have that. I do like the direction in which this team's going, but I don't know if they're there yet.
I also have the Utah Hockey Club in the 5th spot, and Chad, I had a feeling that you were going with Utah in this spot, and Case, I knew that you would have them lower on the ladder than Chad and myself, but you guys know that.
Have I been wrong every year that I have them lower than you guys?
No, you haven't.
But it's fun, Case. They're a young, fun team. All right.
They are going to be a lot of fun to watch. Not only because of the uniforms and just the fans and the vibe and the excitement around Utah and year number 1, and that's going to give the players a big bump, and it already has. Like when they showed up that first day in Utah, and the building is sold out, and seeing all the fans and the kids and how excited they were. Looking at this team top to bottom, I think there's a lot of depth. Like, they had 6 20-goal scorers last season. So that's something to note. So it's a really good forward group. I think Dylan Guenther is going to have a huge year. There were a lot of opinions on that contract extension, but I heard this on 32 Thoughts with Elliot Friedman and now Kyle Bukauskas, of course. And there was a clip of Clayton Keller talking about Dylan Guenther and his ability to shoot the puck. And this is a guy who is teammates with him, but also is good buddies with Austin Matthews and trains with him in Arizona, and says that other than Austin, Dylan Guenther is the next guy that he thinks just has an elite shot and could be a 50-goal scorer in this league. So, and you look at his point totals. He came in and just had such a big impact on this team, and I think he's going to have a huge year. Logan Cooley will take another step forward. He had his ups and downs, but still had 20 goals and 44 points, I believe, last season. So really like the forward group. There's good depth there. The back end, they really shorted up with not only Sergachev, but John Marino. So a top 4 of Sergachev and Durzi, let's say, is your first pair. Then you have Valimaki, who was a great find for them, and Marino. That's a pretty solid top 4. And then you have Ian Cole and another good find in a player like Michael Kesselring, who had a good season last year for this team. I like Ingram. Had a huge year last year for this team. They will need Vejmelka to bounce back. He did struggle last year, so they will need a true tandem going, because I do agree with you, Case, that while those 2 goalies are good, and Ingram had a great year last year, there's no clear number 1 there, so we'll have to see. But no, this team's headed in a great direction. I'm a big fan of Bill Armstrong. You guys know that, and they'll be a lot of fun to watch, and they should be playing meaningful games right until the bitter end.
When I went to the game in Arizona last year, I remember telling Paige, Ingram started and they were playing the Senators. And I remember telling Paige, yeah, this Ingram guy, like, he's good. And their backup, Vamelka, everyone thinks he's good, but like, he's not. And then Ingram got lit up for 3 in the first, got pulled. Vamelka held down the fort and they came back and won the game. So I'm like, I know absolutely nothing, clearly. I sound like a dummy in Arizona talking hockey. So,
yeah, there you go.
oh, Case muted.
Talking about the backhand harp, I hope that I'm wrong about John Marino, but I've never flipped the script so hard on a guy between 2 seasons. 2 seasons ago, I thought he was the best defender on the New Jersey Devils. Last
Remember
year,
you saying that.
I made an argument for him to be scratched a couple games. He just completely fell off and seemed lost in his own end at times, which was the reason I loved him 2 seasons ago. He was so solid on the back end, could move the puck pretty well. You're only going to get 24 points out of him or something like that. But he was just so steady. I was comfortable with him on the ice. But last season, it was not the case. And I was kind of okay with watching him walk.
Change of scenery, maybe, for the guy.
I hope I'm wrong because he's a likable guy, and I'd like to see him succeed in Utah.
Well, and again, like Arizona/Utah, like they have had a really good ability to like reinvent players. We've seen it time and again over the last few years, whether it's a guy like Shane Gostisbehere, who obviously moved on, or Valimaki, or Michael Carcone was a 20-goal scorer last year. Like,
because they're given opportunity that they wouldn't get anywhere else. So, yeah, sure, they actually get to play. I hear where you're coming from. But a guy like Carcone, oh, my God, he was an American League guy for a decade. Like,
Hey, got to give him credit.
I guess, yeah. But opportunity, I mean, listen, you've got to be good enough to be given the opportunity. Yes. But, I think there are, probably 24 AHL players who could have done the same thing.
Fair enough. Not a fan of Michael Carcone.
Got it. Check.
We've got it on the record.
He's going to score 30 this year, isn't he?
Yeah, exactly. And finally, the last point about Utah, Chad, you mentioned the fact that Nashville has 3 first-round picks. I mean, this team has so many draft picks. Like, it's crazy. And so if they're in a good spot at the deadline, you can bet that that Bill Armstrong will be looking to add once again, I think. So there we go. All right, 3 more teams to go, boys. I feel like we're moving at a good pace here in this episode. So let's go to number 6 now. And this is, I really wrestled with 6 and 7. I think there's a clear number 8 team in this division, but I will go with the Minnesota Wild in number 6. Again, like we kind of said with Winnipeg, one of those teams that has just been in that murky middle for so long. And we've said it time and again on this podcast. They've been handicapped with the salary cap and the Parise and Suter buyouts. We don't need to go into that again. Chad, I don't need you to go on about that again.
So last year, man.
Yeah, exactly.
Is it really? Is this the last year?
Next year it goes down to like 1.8 or something like that.
Yeah.
Oh, let me check Cap Friendly. Oh, wait,
I can't. Of course you're going to check. Yeah. But a lot of good core pieces on this team, and what a find Brock Faber was for this franchise. Had a great year, gets the big extension. You have a star player like Kaprizov, Matt Boldy, Marco Rossi took a big step last year. They'll be counting on him. So Minnesota will be counting on a lot of guys internally to improve, which is really good. And then in a year or a couple of years, they can really start to add and try to be a contender again. But a quiet off season. Yakov Trenin was really the only notable signing. Although I will say, even though Trenin's a good player, I think that contract was a bit rich for a bottom 6 forward. I believe it was 4 years, $3.5 million was the AAV for Trenin. But, a lot of good internal pieces on this Wild team that they'll be looking to, for them to get better. I just don't think they have enough to get into the playoffs. And if they do, we know that they're a sure bet to go out in the first round, as it's happened time and time again. So I've got Minnesota in number 6. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I had them in number 5. I actually wrote them down as the Minnesota Wild because they're the most mid team every single year, and I think that trend's going to continue. The only thing that really stood out to me as like a wow on this team is that top pair is phenomenal. Brock Faber's really started to shine, and Jonas Brodin is one of the best defensive defensemen in the entire league. Underrated guy, so I love that pair. After that, it kind of drops off. Ryan Hartman is slotted in as their number 1C at the moment, which I just drafted in fantasy. So I hope that, that continues and he gets lots of playing time with Kaprizov, who I've heard wants to go to the Chicago Blackhawks.
God.
So anyways, yeah, the interesting information continues in the Minnesota Wild. But I just look at this team and see a team that's going to be near and in the race and probably fall short. So I had them at 5. 6 is very reasonable.
Yeah, I don't have much to add about the actual product on the ice because they didn't do anything, and you guys have been over that. They are handcuffed by the cap. They couldn't make any moves, even if they wanted to. So they're the same team, basically, as last year, and they're probably going to finish with a similar amount of points, which was 87 last year, good enough for 6th in the division. Maybe they're a bit better, maybe they're a bit worse, but they're going to be around the same, I think, because they couldn't improve their team because of the cap, which I actually do want to talk about, but I'll wait on that. Man, like this team is going to be relying on Kirill, Boldy, Faber, I guess now, to really carry. And after that, like I know they have pieces, but man, it would be nice if they had cap space to fill in around them. I had them in number 7.
$12 million more to spend on a number 1C for this team. This team changes very quickly.
Yeah. And okay, so I want to get into that because you mentioned the Chicago rumors, right? Like in 2 years, Kirill Kaprizov might be considering going to Chicago. Few things with that. First of all, who's reporting that he's signing there in 2 years? That's crazy talk. Like so much happens in 2 years in professional sports. Like who is like that made no sense when I saw that. Harp, you actually sent it to me and I was like, oh my God, like why is this a report that something may happen in 2 years? Like he's not even eligible for 2 more years to sign with a different team. And to that point, what I wanted to say is, okay, if you're the management group in Minnesota, you're going to give this group 1 full season where you're not paying $15 million to 2 players who don't play for your team. You're going to give this group 1 season where you're able to fill in around the core, and then Kirill's gone after that. Like that, I'm sorry. It makes absolutely no sense. The buyouts were the laziest thing ever. It's handcuffed this team. It's the reason that they've been so mid for so long. And you're right, Case. I looked it up. I couldn't go to Cap Friendly. I had to go to Puckpedia. But as of next year, it's only about 1.6 against the cap, which is fine. You can work with that. But you can't build a team when you're handcuffed by the cap, paying $15 million for 2 players who don't even play for you anymore.
Well, good. Clearly, you didn't listen when I said that that you didn't need to go into this again. But thank you.
But I had to because it's relevant. Every year, I have to get it off my chest once.
Couple of final thoughts on Minnesota. I will say Joel Eriksson-Ek is a big part of this team. I think he's a sneaky Selke pick every year. Like he's a very good player. And Philip Gustafsson. What can he do this season? Because 2 years ago, he was amazing, and he had one of the best save percentages in the entire NHL, I believe. And then last year, he really struggled, and final ride for Marc-Andre Fleury, it looks like. So that's going to be something to see as well. So Minnesota.
Well, and Wallstedt, too. So, like, Gustafsson might not even...
Yeah, and you'll be looking for him to take a step and try to earn himself a job.
He's looking to try to not get lit up.
Wallstedt. He's had some tough outings, but of course, like good prospect.
Yeah,
has been great in the AHL, but hasn't gone so great for him in the
No.
NHL yet. Maybe if they had an extra $15 million to spend on a decor, that'd be nice. But
One more thing. You mentioned Wallstead there, and it got me thinking. I was actually having this conversation with our buddy Luke Sheridan the other night. He's a Detroit fan, and we got talking about all the goaltenders that the Red Wings have. One of them is Sebastian Cossa. Cossa and Wallstead, same draft in the first round, and they've both really struggled so far in their development.
I mean, I think Kosa has struggled a lot more. I mean,
Yes.
I'd have to look it up. I know Wallstead hasn't been good at the NHL level, but I'm under the impression that at the AHL level, yeah, like his numbers have been pretty good. He had a 270 goals against last year and a 910 save through 45 games in Iowa. And the year prior, he had a 908 and a 268. So his numbers are pretty good in the American League.
Yeah.
Whereas, Kosa, I'm not exactly sure how he's been doing, but I think, okay, we'll look at it this year. 913.
Was Kosa not playing East Coast Hockey League games last
Yeah,
season?
he played 46 games in the East Coast last year,
there
or
you
2
go.
years ago, rather, for the Toledo Walleye. Last year, he played for Grand Rapids in the
Okay.
American League, and he had a 913. So I guess he's been
Okay.
better as of late. But
All right. Gotcha.
I mean,
We're
we don't
talking
have
about
the
some 21-year-old goaltenders. Like,
Yeah,
I don't
we-
expect a goalie to be good until they're 23. You know?
yeah.
That's
But it
fair.
was a crazy pick when it happened because everyone thought Wallstedt was the clear number one goalie in the draft, and then they picked Kosa, and
Mhm.
everyone, including us, like we were like, "What? Like who? Why?"
Yeah.
But yeah.
All right, fellas, 2 spots left, 7 and 8. So, Case, we'll go back to you for number 7.
Yeah, I've got to do it. I have the St. Louis Blues at number 7. I really don't know what to make of this team. I was really high on them last year, and then they just very, very disappointing season, really. I like their core group of forwards, of course, but after that, nothing really excites me on this team. I do like the offer sheet moves they made in the offseason. I think both those guys are, young, talented players that, with a little bit more of a chance, can find themselves in St. Louis. A lot of upside for both of them. I think Philip Broberg could be, a good top 4 defenseman for them if things work out for him. But I'm just really not sure what I make of this team and kind of the lack of moves they've made. So I have them at 7.
Yeah, I had them actually in the 6th spot just because I thought they were better than Minnesota, but similar to Minnesota, they basically did nothing. They lost a bunch of guys. They lost Blais, Hayes, Krug to injury, I guess. And then I shouldn't say they did nothing because they did the 2 offer sheet moves, which you mentioned, Case. But I don't know. I know you're not going to get fair market value when you put out an offer sheet. You're going to have to overpay. That's how the system works. But I just look at the 2 deals, in particular the Broberg one, and I just think, I don't know, like they're nowhere near that money, in my opinion. And I don't know what you expect. Maybe you give both of those guys a ton of opportunity and they blossom into a better player than they ever would have been in Edmonton. Maybe that's the underlying philosophy. I like the move of doing an offer sheet just for the boldness of it, but I just don't know if it made the most sense.
I think it's medium risk and high reward for a guy like
Agreed.
Philip Broberg, where, if 2 or 3 years ago I told you that he was making this much money in this season, you'd be like, yeah, that's where he's supposed to be panning out to be. That's what his upside is. That's where his potential is. It hasn't worked out in Edmonton. He was stuck in a log jam there for a while and sent down the AHL. He looked great in the playoffs, and I think that was enough for St. Louis to make a splash on him and hope that maybe it's not this season, maybe it's the season after that he flourishes, and then they look like gangsters.
That could be the case. And let's be honest, like when you look at that back end, he's really the only guy back there who is extremely mobile and a really good puck mover, at least has those skills. Like, you look at their back end right now, and I'm just looking on Daily Faceoff, Nick Leddy and Colton Parayko as your top pair. Then you've got Broberg and Falk and Ryan Suter and Matthew Kessel as your bottom pair. Like Suter, Falk, Leddy, and Parayko, they're all decent defenders in their own right to differing degrees, but there's one underlying theme. They're all old and slow. Like I know Parayko is still pretty good, but the rest of them kind of old, kind of slow. So maybe Broberg gets his opportunity and has a good season, but I don't know. I liked how you put it, medium risk, high reward, but I think the risk is still a little too rich for me. I don't know if I would have done it, but it's bold. You have to say that it's bold.
Well, that is Doug Armstrong for sure. You got to love the line that, if his mother was running the Oilers, then he would have done this as well. Yeah, no, I do like the offer sheets. I think they were able to get some decent players for basically nothing as well. Radek Faksa for future considerations. He's no slouch. They were able to get Matthew Joseph for essentially nothing from Ottawa as well. I mean, those two names they're decent players. They're not guys to write home about, but again, this is a team that's trying to retool on the fly after winning the Stanley Cup back in 2019. And they're just going to have to continue to go through the process and rely on that internal development. I think with Broberg, there is potential for him to be a 20-plus minute a night defenseman for this team, and he's going to have to really grab a hold of this opportunity, one, because of what he's being paid on this short-term deal, and two, because they're going to be without Torrey Krug for the entire season, and Krug, sadly, this may be it for him with this injury, and without him, that is a weak back end, and their blue line wasn't really anything to write home about to begin with. And then in goal, can Binnington have another excellent season like he did last year because he was very good, or do we see Joel Hofer take over and become the number one guy? So a lot of question marks with this team. They're going to need to rely on a lot of internal development and just continue to go through this process, but they're headed in a good direction.
That's one thing I wanted to say about St. Louis, Harp. I'm glad you brought it up as we kind of wrap up on them, is Binnington. Like, I feel like at this point, he's pretty underrated. Last year, this team had 92 points, and I know Binnington is kind of always around and he's a bona fide starter, but you hear about him mostly because of the antics on the ice. You don't necessarily hear about how good he is between the pipes. But last year, just take a guess. In all of the NHL, where do you think Binnington finished in terms of goals saved above expected? The entire league.
Third?
Yeah, fourth. So I guess maybe I'm wrong, or maybe it's just the way I phrased that. But I think he's underrated, and he had a great season last year. We'll see if he can do it again. But that might be the only chance this team has, really. If some of their young stars take a step, Binnington has another good year, their core remains pretty good. It's not crazy to think that they could be a playoff team. I just think they're not as strong as some other playoff teams in other divisions.
He was fifth in goals saved above expected. Just
boo! Really? Did I misread that?
Yeah. So I was a little closer with my seventh guess. But
don't fact check me, Case. I
had it open and I looked at it earlier. So
okay. Yeah, I looked at it earlier and misremembered. But fifth is still pretty good. And look at number 3 there, Anthony Stolarz, the next starter of the Toronto Maple Leafs, perhaps.
In the carousel of Toronto Maple Leaf goaltending.
Yep, your starter, Dennis Hildeby.
Man, he's been pretty good. Not gonna lie, Hildebeest.
All right, number 8, Chicago Blackhawks. Chad?
Yeah, I mean, listen, this team did get better. They added a bunch of guys, Ilya Mikheyev, Tyler Bertuzzi, Teuvo Teravainen, who I totally forgot they added, by the way. They have a healthy Taylor Hall. They added Pat Maroon. They named Nick Foligno captain. Like, there's just so much going on with this team, so many ads. I think they're doing really well for the culture of this team overall. They're hoping guys like Korchinski and other young players can grow. They hope Bedard can put up 100 points this year. If he continues at his point per game pace last year and adds to it a little bit, I think 100 points, that might be crazy. I think the over-under on betting sites is like, 85 or something. But man, he's really good. Yeah, I might take the over.
I would
might
take
have
the over on that.
Yeah, and then on the back end, they added guys like Martinez and Brody, and they added Brossois in net. Like,
Yeah.
they added a lot of guys who have been around the league, who are mostly respected, who kind of bring that bit of culture. Like, I think they're doing really good things for the culture of this team. All of that being said, I don't think they're going to be that much better on the ice this year, but they will be better. I think the 8th spot is fitting, but it wouldn't surprise me if they finish 7th, 6th. A lot of things can happen over the course of a season.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I didn't take down much notes about Chicago, but that was one note I made, is that this team could surprise us for sure. I like what they're doing. They have their core group of guys, young guys, and now they're adding around them to kind of accelerate the rebuild. I'd say it looks like they're trying to push it along as quick as they can through acquisition and the free agency, which, hey, I'm all about that move. And if it's going to make Connor Bedard's career even better, where he doesn't have to have these first 3 seasons that stink because he's on a terrible team, then I'm all for it. Yeah, it's coming together. I think the back end in the ads, like those ads are really good 5 years ago. But again, I can hear the argument, like you're saying, for a culture and for experience and having guys like Vlasic and Korchinski playing around a Brody or a Martinez. I think it's worth it to bring those guys in for that reason alone.
Yeah, totally.
Definitely.
And they don't have to be all-stars on the back end. Like, you just bring in serviceable players who are, like a 5 or a 6 at this point in their careers on most contending teams. They can log, 20 minutes if they need to, and you're not worried about putting them in those situations. And it lets you get to a point where you can kind of shelter the young guys if you want to. You don't have to throw them right into the fire. Like, I just think it makes so much sense, the ads that they've made.
Yeah.
Well, with Chicago too, like just the back end specifically, I think a couple of veterans who've done a really good job with guys like Vlasic and Korchinski are Seth Jones and Connor Murphy. Those are veteran guys who have played a ton of minutes. I know that Jones gets a lot of flack because of his $9.5 million cap hit, but he's been pretty good in Chicago all in all. Like, he's been a veteran presence who's really helped Vlasic. Like, that guy's a good defenseman. He's a monster back there, and they've got him locked up long term, which is good. So really good core of young players. I think Kyle Davidson's done a good job of insulating those young players, as we've mentioned. Naming Nick Foligno captain, that's just great. And honestly, I was pleasantly surprised at Chicago's offseason and the volume of additions that they made to try and hit the fast forward button on this rebuild a little bit. And yes, they could definitely be a team that could surprise us this season. So, but yeah, just looking at all these other teams in this division, Chicago in the 8th spot makes a ton of sense. They will be improved, but yeah, I don't see them much higher than that. Maybe 6th highest, as you mentioned, Chad. So yeah, there we go. That's the Central.
Yeah, and also 2 first-rounders this year, 2 second-rounders this year, 3 second-rounders next year, 2 second-rounders the year after, like loaded with picks. If they want to accelerate this thing, maybe not this season, but the year after, they can do so by flipping a few of those picks or guys at the deadline, whatever they got to do. I think they're in a good position now that when it comes time to sign Bedard to his first contract, they'll be competing. Like, I don't think they're that far away, really.
Yeah, when it comes time to sign Kaprizov to his second contract.
Exactly. When you've got Bedard and Kaprizov each making $25 million each a year,
Yeah. Oh, that second contract for Bedard is going to, or that first contract, I guess, coming out of his ELC, that is going to be rich. Holy.
Blank check.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, seriously.
Yeah. All right, there we go, fellas. That's the Central. Next week, we will dive into the Metropolitan Division, of course, as our division previews continue ahead of the 24-25 NHL season. Thanks for listening, and we will chat with you again next week. Take care.